Rain hit the window like a warning, soft but relentless. The air inside the hospital room was still, the kind of stillness that clung to your skin like grief. Lucien's eyes, newly opened, glistened under the pale light, adjusting to a world that had waited 2 long years to be seen again. But they weren't searching for colors or shapes. They were fixed on her. Valeria. She sat frozen on the edge of the chair, hands clenched together as if in prayer. Her heart pounded so hard it echoed in her ears, louder than the machines monitoring his vitals. She hadn't spoken a word since the doctor removed the final bandage. And now, those eyes she thought she'd never face, looked directly at her. "You're not Celeste," he said. Quiet. Final. Like a truth dropped into a canyon. She flinched. Her throat closed. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. The world tipped sideways. There was no script for this moment. Only raw truth. "I know your voice," Lucien continued. "It's warmer. The way you breathe when you're nervous. The way you touch my hand when you think I'm asleep." I knew. Tears streamed down her face. Not the quiet ones she had learned to hide, but tears that broke like glass from a dam too long held. "Why didn't you say something?" she asked, her voice a broken whisper. Lucien stood, slow and deliberate, walking to her like someone stepping over fragments of memory. He stopped inches away. "Because I wanted to see who you were," he said. "Not who they told me you were. And now I know." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was saturated with everything they had never said. She couldn't look away. His eyes, brown, steady, kind, saw her. Not the lie. Not the name she had borrowed. But her. That moment had no thunder, no music. Just breath and truth. The day he opened his eyes, the world didn't change. But her world did. Weeks passed. The press dubbed it a miracle. The blind billionaire could see again. The headlines called it a rebirth. But in the mansion hidden behind iron gates and whispers, there were no celebrations. Just quiet breakfasts. Tense silences. Polite distance. Valeria didn't leave. And Lucien didn't ask her to. They lived in the same house, but not together. Like echoes of something unfinished. He was kind. Always kind. But distant. She was present. Always present. But fading. Every morning, she placed tea by his side, the way he liked it. Every evening, she turned the pages of a book he didn't really listen to. And in between, she watched the man she loved see her clearer than anyone ever had, and still remain just out of reach. One night, he stood at the balcony, moonlight tracing his profile. She walked up behind him, unsure if she should speak. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. Her voice barely above the wind. "But it did," he replied. Not bitter. Just true. She stepped closer. "Do you hate me?" He turned. No. The word hit harder than if he'd said yes. "Then what do you feel?" she asked. He looked down, then back at her. "I feel like I was in love with a stranger who turned out to be more honest than anyone I've ever known." She covered her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. "You don't owe me kindness." "No," he said. "But I owe you truth." She nodded. Stepped back. The night pulled around her like a curtain. And she knew, forgiveness wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it was simply being allowed to stay. Lucien didn't ask her to leave. And she didn't pack. But everything had changed. She began to find pieces of herself she had long buried. In the small things. Replanting the garden. Fixing the broken door hinge in the library. Organizing his old sheet music by touch alone. One day, he joined her on the garden bench. Said nothing for a long time. Then, I used to think blindness was the cruelest fate. But I was wrong. She looked at him. What is being seen, and still feeling invisible? Her hand trembled beside his. But she didn't move it. He continued. With you, even when I couldn't see, I never felt invisible. She turned to him. Slowly. Cautiously. Do you still see me? He nodded. Then why don't you hold me? A pause. Then he did. And for the first time since the veil was lifted, since the truth was bared, since their lives became a maze of what-ifs and almosts, he held her. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't desperate. It was just real. He didn't say he loved her. She didn't ask. But something healed. Quietly. In that moment, beneath the vines and the fading sky, two people who were never supposed to find each other again, sat in silence. And stayed. 6 years ago, the air in the cathedral was thick with lilies and secrets. The girl who now carried his name had stood in the same place, but with a different name on her lips, and a different fear in her chest. Her steps were hesitant, not because the aisle was too long, but because every footstep echoed a lie. Back then, Valeria wasn't the bride. She wasn't even supposed to be in the country. But that morning, her mother had made a phone call, and her life had changed before she even opened her eyes. She had been sleeping on her sister Celeste's couch, still smelling faintly of stale perfume and exhaustion. Celeste was supposed to marry Lucien Drake. A powerful man. Blind since childhood. Rich beyond reason. And distant enough for their mother to believe she could manipulate the arrangement. But Celeste had vanished the night before the wedding. No one knew where she'd gone. No note. No call. Just a room left in chaos and a voicemail left unanswered. Valeria was yanked from sleep by a voice sharper than broken glass. Get up. You're wearing the dress. You're going to marry him. She had laughed at first, genuinely thinking her mother was joking. But then she saw the steamer, the hair stylist, the assistant pressing a veil. And the way her mother looked at her with the kind of desperation that eats away at pride. We can't lose this. You're the only one who can save us now. The makeup artist called her Celeste. The driver called her Celeste. The wedding coordinator, the priest, the guests, everyone. She wanted to scream, to say this wasn't her life. But then she looked into the mirror and saw her sister's lipstick painted onto her own lips, her curls pressed to mimic Celeste's signature style, and she realized she had already disappeared. The only person who didn't call her Celeste that day was Lucien. He had never spoken her name. He only listened. He listened as she stumbled through rehearsed vows, listened as her hands trembled in his, listened as she whispered, "I do," like it was an apology. She remembered how his head tilted slightly as if trying to place her voice. That tiny movement had terrified her more than any wedding guest's stare. Later that night, after the ceremony, after the photos, after the cake and applause, they had arrived at his estate. And for the first time, they were alone. Valeria had stood frozen in the hallway, unsure whether to follow him or run. She didn't run. Instead, she stepped into the home of a man who knew how to navigate darkness better than most could see the light. And he let her in. The next few weeks passed in a blur of silence. Lucien was polite. Gracious. But distant. She played the role. Memorized facts from Celeste's diary. Recalled stories she'd been told secondhand. She wore Celeste's perfume. Used her favorite tea. Wrote her name on the holiday cards. And yet, Lucien never once called her Celeste. He never once said her name. He only said, "You." And that, "you," began to chip away at the mask. Every time he said it, she felt like he was speaking to someone real. Someone specific. Not a ghost in borrowed skin. There was one night she remembered most. A storm had rolled in from the mountains, and the wind had howled like a choir of lost voices. The lights had flickered, and the house groaned with every gust. She found him in the music room, standing by the piano. "Do you play?" she asked softly, trying to break the silence. He turned his head. "Only in dreams." She walked over and rested her fingers on the ivory keys, not pressing down, just feeling their coolness. "Then dream aloud tonight." His hands joined hers. And together, they played a clumsy lullaby. Off-key. Disjointed. But real. When the last note faded, Lucien whispered, "You laugh differently now." Valeria stiffened. "What do you mean?" He turned toward her, eyes closed, but expression sharp. Celeste's laugh had an edge. Yours has questions." She looked away. "Maybe I'm just tired." "Or maybe you're not her," he said so quietly she almost convinced herself she'd misheard it. The next morning, she almost packed her things. Almost called a cab. Almost left a note that said nothing but, "I'm sorry." But she didn't. Because that same morning, Lucien had asked her if she wanted to go for a walk. It was the first time he'd asked her anything personal. They walked the perimeter of the estate, through the gardens, past the old stone bench with moss growing over its legs. And he had asked her to describe the flowers. So she did. Lavender. Hydrangeas. Orchids. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. He listened, nodding at every color and shape she painted for him. When they returned, he said, "I like your voice when you're not pretending." She wanted to believe he meant it. From that day on, things shifted. Not drastically. But quietly. He started inviting her to his reading room. She started making tea without asking. He'd ask about her day. She'd stop correcting herself when she forgot to use Celeste's preferences. And then came the letter. It arrived in a cream envelope, sealed with the Drake family insignia. She found it on his desk one morning. Curiosity got the better of her. She opened it. It was a letter to his lawyer. Requesting a change of beneficiary. He had signed it. Dated it. It was meant for her. But at the bottom, he had written the wrong name. Valeria Quinn. Not Celeste. She clutched the letter like it was burning her. It was the first time she saw her name in his handwriting. And it felt heavier than any truth she had buried. She placed the letter back, perfectly aligned, praying he wouldn't notice her hands had shaken. But he did. That night, he asked, "Do you believe a person can love someone without knowing their face?" She didn't answer. Because her heart was too loud. And her lies too fragile. He didn't press. He only said, "Good night, Valeria." It was the first time he had said her name. And the first time she cried herself to sleep without shame. Michael sat in the quiet, his phone clutched like a lifeline he didn't know how to use anymore. The screen was blank. No messages. No return calls. Only his reflection, tired and lined, stared back. He hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, but it wasn't exhaustion that gnawed at him, it was regret. Pure and undiluted. The kind that didn't scream, but whispered in every breath you took, "You let her go." He played the voicemail again, the one she'd left before disappearing. Her voice cracked somewhere in the middle. "I didn't lie to hurt you. I lied because I thought, if I gave you the truth, I'd lose the only moment we ever had. I didn't want to be a story you erased." She never said goodbye. Maybe because she didn't believe she deserved one. Or maybe because she hoped he'd come find her, like he once promised. And now here he was. Empty. Ashamed. In a city that seemed to know everything but what mattered. He opened the drawer beside him. There, at the very back, was the bracelet. Red. Frayed. Tiny. It had been hers. He'd tied it around her wrist the night the storm collapsed every plan they thought they had. "If we ever lose each other," he had said, "this will be the thread that brings us back." He never thought he'd lose her like this. Michael closed his eyes. The rain outside smeared the lights of the city. And for the first time, he allowed the memory to come back in full. Not just pieces. All of it. 6 years ago. A night drenched in silence. He was 27, already building empires, already running from ghosts. He hated parties, but that night he stayed because of the music. And then she had walked in, not like she belonged, but like she was looking for something. She carried a tray of champagne, but her eyes searched for meaning. She was the kind of woman people didn't remember, unless she looked at you. And when she looked at him, everything else had blurred. She didn't recognize him as someone important. That's what made her dangerous. That's what made her unforgettable. They talked in the back corner of the ballroom. She said she used to play piano but stopped because the keys reminded her of her father's last words. He said he hated music because it filled the silence too honestly. They stayed like that for hours, pretending they weren't strangers. Then the storm hit. Lights flickered. People screamed. And she pulled him by the hand and ran, not away, but towards something they didn't understand yet. They ended up under the eaves of an old bookstore. Rain soaked their clothes. Her mascara ran like tears she wouldn't admit. And he said something he never meant to say out loud. "You make me feel like the world might forgive me." She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that broke something inside you. He never asked her name. She never asked for his. That night, when they parted, he gave her the bracelet. "If we meet again, this will be the proof we're real." He never saw her again. Until 3 weeks ago. She was standing at the edge of his boardroom, holding a clipboard and a pen, her hair tied back, her voice different. But her silence? That hadn't changed. It was her silence that betrayed her. The way she didn't fill the room with apologies or charm. The way she stood like someone bracing for an earthquake. And when she handed him the contract, her fingers brushed his for a second too long. That's when the first crack began. Now, sitting here, everything felt like that bracelet. Tied too tightly, cutting off the air. He stood. He had to move. Had to do something that felt like redemption. The next morning, he was outside the small neighborhood bakery she'd once mentioned in passing. It was closed, but he waited. He asked the neighbors. He followed names, addresses, rumors. One led to another. By nightfall, he had an address. An old apartment 2 blocks from the river. When he knocked, the woman who answered didn't look surprised. "You're too late," she said. But not by much. She handed him an envelope. Inside, there was no letter. Only a single photo. A child with soft brown eyes and a smile that bent like hers. The back had a date, and one sentence: "He likes chocolate more than apple pie." Michael sat on the curb outside the building for hours, staring at the photo. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. But his heart fell apart in silence. She had given him everything. And he hadn't even seen her. The next day, he went to the school. Waited until the last bell rang. Children poured out, laughing, tugging backpacks, chasing kites of laughter. And then he saw him. The boy. His son. Running, falling, standing up again. Resilient. Just like her. She was there too. Standing by the gate, arms crossed, pretending not to see him. He walked toward her. Slowly. Every step felt like a confession. She turned, not surprised. Just tired. He said her name. Not the one she'd given the world. The one she told him when no one else was listening. She looked at him, and for the first time in years, she didn't flinch. "I remember," he said. "Everything." The boy tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, who's that?" She knelt. "Someone who used to love the sound of rain." The boy looked up. Does he still? Michael knelt too. Only when it reminds me of you. She didn't smile. But her fingers brushed his again. Soft. Like a chance. Like a maybe. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for time. And for the first time, she didn't walk away. The morning mist hung low over the city like a secret too heavy to rise. He waited near the cafe where she used to write, hoping the memory of her scent might still linger in the corners of its worn wooden walls. His coffee had gone cold, untouched, but his eyes never stopped scanning the street. It had been 3 weeks since she left. 3 weeks since the truth had come out, not with a scream, but a quiet breath of surrender. She didn't run. She simply disappeared, like someone who had given enough of herself and had no more to offer. And yet, somewhere deep in the folds of that silence, he still believed she hadn't stopped loving him. She hadn't told him where she would go. There were no dramatic messages or final goodbyes. Only that look in her eyes, fragile, glistening with everything unsaid. He had memorized it, as if it could guide him back to her. That day, he walked without direction, letting memory pull him instead of maps. He ended up by the lake. The same place she once told him was her sanctuary, the place she imagined peace might live. It was still, the surface like glass, and for a moment he believed he could see her reflection in it. He sat there for hours. People passed. Boats drifted. The sun began to tilt westward. And then he saw her. Not like a vision, no, she was real. Her shoulders a little hunched, a tote bag over one arm, hair messily tied. She wasn't dressed to impress anyone. And that's how he knew. She wasn't trying to be someone else anymore. She had let the mask fall, even in front of the world. He stood up slowly, afraid any sudden movement might scare her away. She didn't see him at first. She was focused on the child walking beside her. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7, holding her hand with the kind of trust that made him ache. The boy bent to tie his shoe, and she leaned down to help him. It was such an ordinary gesture. And yet, for him, it broke something open. He saw the way she smiled at the child, soft and whole. And he knew, this wasn't just her child. This was her reason for everything. Her anchor. Her heartbreak. Her hope. She looked up. Their eyes met. And for a second, time cracked open. She didn't move. Neither did he. But everything between them surged forward. Regret. Love. Grief. All the words they'd swallowed, all the nights they hadn't slept. He took a step. And another. Until he was close enough to see the rise and fall of her breath. Valeria, he whispered. She blinked. Her fingers tightened around the boy's. You found me, she said, not with surprise, but with something like resignation. I never stopped, he said. Even when I didn't know where to look. The boy stared up at him, curious, wide-eyed. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped forward. Are you the man from Mommy's story? He asked. Valeria's face went pale. Lucian's heart stuttered. I don't know, he replied softly, kneeling down. What story did she tell you? The boy shrugged. The one where the man never said goodbye. But the woman still waited, just in case. Lucian looked up. Valeria was trembling. She hadn't planned for this. Hadn't planned for any of this. But the truth had a way of finding its own light. I'm sorry, she said suddenly. I never meant to lie. I was scared. And selfish. And I thought pretending would hurt less than losing you for real. He stood. You didn't lose me. I just didn't know where to find you yet. Her lips parted. Her eyes filled. But no tears fell. Not this time. I thought once you knew the truth, you'd never want to see me again, she whispered. And I thought if I didn't see you again, I'd never forgive myself, he replied. Turns out, we were both wrong. Silence bloomed between them, tender and full. The child shifted his weight. Then reached up and took Lucian's hand without asking. As if some part of him already understood what was happening. They didn't need more words. Not right away. They just walked. Slowly. Along the path by the water. The three of them. No promises. No declarations. Just steps. One after another. Later that evening, when the sky had turned to gold and the lake caught fire with light, Valeria turned to him. "Do you really think we can go back?" she asked. He looked at her, not as a man seeing a stranger, but as someone who finally saw the whole truth. "No," he said. "But we can start again. And maybe this time, we'll start with the truth." She nodded. Not fast. Not certain. But honest. And then, with a shaky breath, she said the words he didn't know he needed to hear. "My name is Valeria. I'm not perfect. I'm not who you thought I was. But I'm here. And I'm willing." Lucian smiled. "Good. Because I've waited long enough to fall in love with the right person." The boy laughed, just once. Then asked if they could get ice cream. And so, they did. Years from now, maybe they would tell him the whole story. Maybe not. Maybe they'd just let him believe his parents were always meant to find each other. That love, in its strangest, most complicated form, had led them all here. But for now, the sun was setting. And the boy held their hands as they crossed the street together. And none of them were pretending anymore.